And we're back with Chuck Ocelli. Ocelli.com is the website, and the Ocelli Effect is the podcast. Chuck is coming to us from the JFK Lancer Conference. This is, I believe, the 27th conference in Dallas, Texas, happening all weekend long. Some great speakers, some great panel discussions. The in-person conference is sold out, but you can attend the virtual conference and, in fact, go back and see what happened on Friday and Saturday as well. And, of course, tomorrow it's in full swing. We were talking I know what I wanted to get into. Chuck, to me, this is one of the strange things about this whole assassination, and that is what's been called the disappearing Mauser. So Deputy Sheriff Roger Craig is on the scene after the shots are fired. At one point, he runs up into the grassy knoll. There was a plume of smoke seen coming from there. There are cigarette butts, footprints. He sees a woman trying to get into her car and leave the parking lot in an awful hurry. He tries to detain her. It seems he's stopped by another deputy sheriff, Lewis, who basically, takes this witness or suspect off his hands. At some point, he crosses Elm Street. He starts speaking to another witness. That person is, here's Deputy Sheriff Lewis again, taking that person off his hands. Then he goes up into the Texas Book Depository building onto the 6th floor, where he sees 3 shell casings perfectly lined up. I don't know, like on a windowsill or on the floor, which he thought was kind of strange. Then he finds what he believes to be the murder weapon, which is a Mauser. I mean, it says Mauser right on the weapon, and yet suddenly, I mean, and that was broadcast, I think, on all 3 U.S. networks. The murder weapon was a Mauser. Then all of a sudden, it becomes a Mannlicher Carcano. How did the Mauser become a Carcano?
Fascinating question. And you know what's even more fascinating is that once again we can find hard evidence that contradicts other hard evidence. This is a theme developing here, Richard. Wouldn't it be amazing if we had investigative agencies in America that could absolutely, with all the resources and scientific certainty, nail these sorts of things down and tell us an absolutely certain narrative in a relatively short amount of time?
Yeah, that would be nice. And then you woke up from your dream.
Well, right. And then I remembered this is planet Earth and this is America. And I wish it was the country they told me it was. But anyway, back to it. Sure, Mauser, and he's not the only one to have made that claim. There were more than one report written there, and some people have said, well, this guy owned a sportsman's shop and he should have known his guns or whatever. Look, any male in the South should have known guns well enough to be able to identify that Mauser. And later on, some of them would actually turn around and say, well, I meant a Mauser-style rifle, et cetera, et cetera. Here's the funny thing. Roger Craig was absolutely certain about what he saw. He spoke honestly, in my opinion. That's what he was saying. And yet, there was something called the Allier film, where there is a search conducted at the 6th floor, and that rifle is pulled out from between some boxes. And if you look carefully at that rifle in the Allier film, it appears to me as though it is not a Mauser. It is, in fact, a Carcano, which is the right way to say it, by the way. It is a Carcano. It is not really a rifle per se. Technically, it's this, that, third thing. We know what we're talking about. A longer gun, sure. It is a Carcano. Now, Roger Craig is actually in the background of the Allier film, is there during this search, and is standing not far from this rifle. And yet, even though you can see it's a Carcano, he says it's a Mauser still. So, am I saying Roger Craig is lying? Am I saying the film is lying? No. What I'm saying is that no matter any which way you turn in this case, I can find reliable, not so reliable. I can find stories from reliable and reputable people and irreputable people. I can contradict this 80 different ways. It almost means that we need to ask a much larger question, doesn't it? In my mind, Richard, what do you think?
Well, I I mean, to me, it becomes a swamp. I mean, I don't know what to think at this point. I'm lost. Maybe that's the whole point, right?
Well, it does seem to me to be that point. I mean, after all, doctors that are under control of the military take over and do an autopsy. You might have wanted to mention that later, or might have thought that I don't know much about that, but I spent a lot of time banging my head up against the wall with that one as well. 3 doctors who are supposed to be teaching things. One guy who is familiar with, wounds and gunshot wounds was brought in later, but 2 Navy doctors conducting an autopsy and made a absolute disaster of it. The President of the United States, they didn't need to explain anything properly. If you take a look at that, I mentioned those notes being burned earlier too, didn't I? That was destroyed to avoid souvenir hunters. I love that. Which,
yeah,
he
sure.
was concerned about that. And that's something that Landis said too. I just wanted to note that was an interesting thing. Dr. Hume said he wanted to avoid it becoming some morbid curiosity. His notes later on in life that had, some of the president's blood on them because he had seen Lincoln's chair with the blood on it, et cetera, et cetera. Interesting part about that, though, is that he didn't destroy other notes that had, blood on them. But he destroyed his notes with the blood on them and then played a little game about how he destroyed his notes. Look, I'm telling you, it is literally endless. And you can make a lot of conclusions. I could tell you my opinion. And then someone could call up and give you a complete refutation of that opinion based on something that has some validity one way or another. And we could do this a lot. Wouldn't it be interesting, once again, if we had a group of people that were willing to go and, that's right. Citizen researchers have been doing this since day one way or another. We've been going after it with our own resources. And the government gave us a couple of investigations, which, by the way, there are 2 slightly different official conclusions about the murder of President Kennedy. I don't know if you're aware of that, but we could talk about that too if we have time.
Well, there was the second investigation in Congress, which concluded it was a conspiracy. That was what, 1978?
Well, you have the House Select Committee in the 70s, but before that, you had a couple of investigations, including that of District Attorney Jim Garrison, right? Who actually is the only guy who ever attempted to prosecute somebody for the murder of John F. Kennedy, because Lee Harvey Oswald, we didn't even get to this, didn't survive the weekend in custody. We could also talk about Jack Ruby and how one lone assassin was killed by another lone assassin, case closed according to the Warren Commission. But you're not supposed to question that or anything, right? Just going back to it, look, you had the Garrison investigation, you had the Clark panel, you had, a bunch of things that happened until we had the Assassination Records Review Board, which wasn't really an investigation, but really an attempt to collect the evidence. And there's a struggle involved there. That happened in the mid-'90s, and partially at the behest of Oliver Stone's film and a slide that encouraged public outrage, which, by the way, your second-hour guest can speak to quite well because he participated in that stuff, was around for it. He's a great speaker on that. So when you want to go to Assassination Records Review Board talk, definitely Jim DiEugenio is the guy. So moving forward, there's a lot of ways to go, a lot of investigations. But the House Select Committee, they kind of came up with a slightly different conclusion. You know that, right, Richard?
Oh, yes.
Yeah. See, you still have Lee Harvey Oswald being guilty, according to the House Select Committee, but highly likely that there was a conspiracy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So a little different. And both official conclusions count, by the way, as far as I can tell. They do stand on the record, even to this day. Which they also found there might have been a conspiracy in killing Dr. King as well, because House Select Committee had 2 different jobs there to look into the assassination of President Kennedy and also Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. But anyway,
the record, the documents that came out after the formation of the Assassination Record Review Board, is there anything in there that you've seen that definitively, to your mind, links Jack Ruby with Oswald before they met in the basement of the county courthouse?
In the latest releases, difficult to say. But there has been tons of evidence over the years about the different interactions that Ruby might have had with people that knew Oswald, with Oswald himself. There have been accounts of various witnesses. Again, some of them reputable, some of them not so reputable, that cause me to believe that it's very, very possible that Jack Ruby did know Lee Harvey Oswald. And no, it's not based on the whole look that he gives him as he's being shot, because if you take a look at the fact that he had lights in his eyes and everything else, I don't think that he saw Jack Ruby coming when he actually shot him in the gut. And then a foolish medical person there at the Dallas Public Safety Building there attempted to do chest compressions while this guy had a gut shot, which was brilliant. Might have actually contributed to his to Lee Harvey Oswald's death. Just saying. Not saying he was part of the conspiracy. Incompetence is another way to get things done. But, this is how some of these things have worked. You have a lawyer who's telling you about physics and ballistics. You have people doing chest compressions on a guy who's bleeding out. You have, this is what floored me at the age of 9, by the way. The fact that I was told, and this is when I learned about it, because I was born in 1972. So I'm learning about this in 3rd grade, and they said, yeah, okay, so the president was killed, and this guy Oswald was in custody, and then he was killed, and he was killed by this guy, Jack Ruby, and I threw up my hand, and I said, wait a minute, was Jack Ruby a police officer? No. Was Jack Ruby a inmate in a jail cell? No. Well, how is it that anybody dies in police custody unless either A, the police killed him, or B, a cellmate took him out? These things made sense to a street-level kid like myself, and apparently neither one of them made sense in this scenario. No, he was killed while in police custody. Yeah, something is wrong right there.
So,
that's not the way the world works, Richard.
Off the top of the show, I was mentioning that on this day 60 years ago, President Kennedy was in Tampa delivering a speech at the, I guess it was the Armory, and then some other places on the itinerary. But there is a Tampa connection. There's some speculation that I believe it was a Tampa mafia figure said that, or maintained that Jack Ruby had infiltrated the Dallas police. That's how he was able to determine the parade route. Also was instrumental in getting Oswald his job at the Texas Book Depository building so that he could carry out the assassination. What do you make of that theory, that story?
Well, best I understand, Lenny Mae Randall might have contributed to him getting that job. A lot of people have made interesting observations about how he got the job. To my mind, it's not really all that suspicious how he wound up getting a part-time job as an order filler, or maybe he was also assisting with moving boxes around while they were refinishing the floor, et cetera, et cetera. But this idea about mob figures being connected, Santo Trapacante, interesting fellow for sure.
Yeah, that's the
guy who might have been able to, offer up some orders for people to do things. That was part of his everyday existence. Of course, I don't stand with the mafia did it theory. I haven't seen enough evidence to really back it all up. Now, there's plenty of guys that could have been angry because a whole lot of points, and this is what's interesting, a whole lot of points in your opening piece are very true. The idea that there was disgruntled, let's call them Italian businessmen, over the results of the 1960 election because they had felt that maybe they had assisted him in places like, I don't know, Illinois. Let's pick a spot on the map. I'm being facetious. And
Lake Michigan, to be exact.
Oh, yeah, anyways, things like this happening, sure. There was also the fact that Robert F. Kennedy, he might have been a problem for Italian businessmen at the time. And he was the attorney general and the president's brother. And statements like, we should kill that guy, I've heard recordings of those things. We should, and we're gonna, and things like that when it comes to Bobby Kennedy, for sure. But wait a minute, hold on. I also have to get into, was Joe Kennedy a bootlegger, actually? Was he tied in with the mafia? How about, JFK's relationship with Frank Sinatra? Oops, I said mafia. Anyway, there is no mafia, Richard. Remember that. Anyhow, J. Edgar Hoover thought that way until somebody told him, please go do your job. But anyway, there's a lot to unpack there for certain. However, one must have to ask themselves, if our government knew that organized crime was absolutely responsible for killing the president, and it was not in any way in any sort of interest to our government, our agencies, our intelligence community, et cetera, why the massive cover-up for the next, well, 1 decade plus half a century? Why do you do that? Because it has been covered up. This is indisputable in my mind. The cover-up is indisputable. The crime is loaded with circular reasoning and disputes aplenty. And it doesn't matter which theory you prefer. It doesn't matter which way you want to advocate. Even if you want to go with the lone gunman idea, even if you are a lone nut theorist, and I think that's the proper term, even if you're one of those guys, you've got problems making that case if you're honest. Not only, from the point of view of entering it into the legal record, but just based on the things that we know. And there's still plenty that we don't know, despite the mountains of evidence that have been gathered by multiple people over the decades.
So how do we explain 60 years after? We'll probably have to save this for the after the break, but I'll get the question out there and you can think about it and come back to me with an answer. And that is, 60 years later, just about anyone who might have been involved in the assassination, likely dead. So what is the rationale then for continuing to withhold documents, which I think an argument could be made is in contravention of the law? The Assassination Record Review Board ordered that those documents were all to be released by 2017. There are still thousands of pages outstanding. And the reason being that, they're, protecting the identity of certain individuals and so forth. But they're all dead, most likely. We'll pick up on that point. Chuck Ocelli stays with us. Chuck Ocelli, polymath, JFK researcher, podcaster. The Ocelli Effect is the podcast, and the website, ocelli.com, and we've linked up to that at coasttocoastam.com, ocelli.com. And Chuck is checking in from Dallas, where the JFK Lancer Conference is happening all weekend long. The in-person conference is sold out, but you can get tickets or still do the virtual conference online. And the best way to do that is to go to jfklancerpublications.com, jfklancerpublications.com, and you can, of course, you've got all of tomorrow's proceedings, but then you've got 2 previous days that you can watch online as well. All right, Chuck, are you ready to dive into some calls and take some questions and comments?
Sure, but I'd love to answer your question really quickly first.
Yes. Yes.
Okay, so
I was asking, who are they protecting at this point? Who are they protecting?
Yeah, good question, because, I've taken a look at situations ranging from Curtis LeMay in World War I and World War II, et cetera, that were connected to the assassination. And then I looked at other historical situations. Here's something I can report to you. They're still withholding certain documentation on the Lincoln assassination. But don't listen to me. Judge Thunheim, who was the head of the Assassination Records Review Board, appointed John Thunheim. Go ahead and look it up and see the story he tells about when they showed a document to the CIA guy who was there to come up with different reasons as to why they couldn't release the document. And he was asked, why is it? Why is it that we can't release this thing? Can you give me a reason? He waited a few moments, and then after a little while he said, give me a minute, I'll think of one. So this is the way it works. And John Thunheim tells a much better version of that story. I urge people to go find it. Sorry, but there's the answer to your question, Richard. So let's get to it.
Right. I was just going to say, is it possible that it's not about protecting individuals anymore? It's about protecting certain institutions.
Well, maybe. But then again, what institution or source and methodology existed from Lincoln's time to now? I don't know.
True. Good point.
Good
point. Well, I was thinking specifically of the Kennedy assassination, and I was maybe, suggesting the CIA. anyway, let's go to the phones. And Todd is in Bellevue, Washington. Todd, welcome to Coast.
Thank you very much, Richard. Now, I listened to a podcast entitled America's Untold Stories with Mr. Mark Grobert as a one-stop shop for the Kennedy assassination. And the only thing I have a little bit of trouble with him is he thinks that the Zapruder film has been undoctored. And I was wondering, if you support Jim Fetzer's contention that the Zapruder film was manipulated and edited by the CIA.
All right, good question, Todd. What do you think, Chuck, the Zapruder film?
Well, sure, but I have no connection to that podcast, although those guys were also here today. Anyways, my opinion on that is that I do not believe that it was doctored in the way that Mr. Fetzer claims it was. Has it been altered? The answer is yes. But has it been altered or recreated or wholly fabricated? The short answer, I do not believe so, based on a lot of different things. But I'm not in the Fetzer camp, if that's what you're looking for. I would say, yeah. I would say that it has been altered to some degree, and any version you've ever seen in public is not an original, not even close to it. And there is questions about where the original film actually is in my mind. But here we are. I don't believe that the content, I don't believe it was fabricated by the CIA or any of that. Yes.
Todd, thank you for the question. I have something that's always been gnawing at me, Chuck, and I've never really heard a satisfactory answer. Abraham Zapruder taking this home movie. All of a sudden, shots are being fired. The camera doesn't shake. He doesn't duck to, he doesn't hit the ground. It's just like it's on a steady cam. Don't you find that unusual that the person who's, the most significant and watched piece of home movie in history, there's no shaking, there's no, jolting of the camera. What do you think of that? How do we explain that?
Very simple, because you've never seen the original. The original shakes all over the place, number one. Number two, there are artifacts in the film when you take a look at it frame by frame where you can see that there were shakes. In fact, people have attempted to line it up and believe they have timed 4 shots specifically to certain frames based on some blurs, given that, Zapruder might have shook a bit at certain points in time. But you're looking at stabilized versions all the time. Anytime you've seen it on TV, anybody's video, et cetera, it is literally not in its original form as Abraham Zapruder shot it in any circumstance if you've ever seen it broadcast or demonstrated anywhere.
All right, that answers that. I would have thought that he would have hit the ground. I know I would have. Our good friend Cornelius checking in from Alexandria, Louisiana. Cornelius, welcome.
Hey, Richard and Chuck, boy, this is a great program. And our callers and listeners are some of the best, like that first guy, Todd. Chuck, this is Cornelius White in Alexandria, Louisiana. I met Tommy and George at an Oswald conference in New Orleans at the Crown Plaza and stuff a few years back. And my lawyer was Richard V. Burns. He worked directly with Jim Garrison, just like you were talking about the Kennedy assassination. He knew a whole lot about it. He's taken cases to the Supreme Court and won. He was an excellent lawyer here in Alexandria, Louisiana. Now, he's passed, but Demetric Burns is still alive, so his son may know some things. He said authors used to call him all the time to get information about the JFK assassination. Richard, I got another good guest I want to tell you about. That's Abraham W. Bolden. He was mentioned many times at the Oswald conference. He has a book out called The Echo of Dealey Plaza. He just got his pardon from Biden last year. It took him 60 years to get his pardon. But he knows something about the Kennedy assassination also, and he tried to prevent it. And I think that's why they set him up. And everybody knows I was set up by the Bureau of Prisons and the FBI. But Chuck,
Cornelius,
if you're looking at those two people, God bless you, Richard. God bless you.
Hold on. Cornelius, hold on for a second. I got a favor to ask you, because I had someone emailed me. They want to get in touch with you because they want to send you a book. and it's the Ray Hicks book. I don't know if you remember the interview I did. They want to send you a copy, and if you could speak with Don and with your permission, I'll pass your email or contact information on to this person.
I don't have an email. I don't mind giving my address out. It's 30.
Well, no, not to me, not on the air, please. If you want to do it with Donna, and then she can give it to me off the air. Okay, I think that would be better. Cornelius, thank you for that. All right.
Well, let me second Cornelius's recommendation to have Abraham Bolden on your show, Richard. I think you would find him extremely fascinating, a great interview if he's willing to do it. He's older now, but he's a wonderful guy just personally, and has a hell of an interesting story to tell related to the Kennedy assassination, if you're not aware.
Okay, I will check it out. What do you make of the James Files story? That this fellow that was in Joliet prison serving time for killing a police officer has confessed to the killing to a Dutch researcher. He was on the grassy knoll. He claims he fired the fatal headshot.
Yeah, Wim Dankbar is the Dutch researcher you're thinking of. And, Mr. Sutton, which I believe was his legal name before we went to this Files thing, I do not find his story credible. And this is sad because I have to spend time on a show where I'd love to talk about real conspiracy, debunking certain things. I don't believe Mr. Files' story flat.
All right.
That's the end of it there.
Fair enough.
It doesn't comport with a whole lot of solid evidence. And I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. We're trying to separate the wheat from the chaff because there's so many different stories floating around out there. Let's say hi to Ed in Charlotte, North Carolina. Ed, welcome to Coast.
Thanks, Richard. Chuck, I agree with your assessment of Richard as being a wonderful host. I got 4 or 5. I'm going to nail a couple of quick ones. Mark Lane in Rush to Judgment, I believe it was, talked about a brand new bullet being on Kennedy's stretcher, which he said was stupid because obviously it was a plant and had nothing to do with it, but they were trying to sway people with it. Second, I personally have spoken with Gianni Russo, who was very involved and flew around the country to the head bosses as the eyes and ears of his guy in New York. And when he was in New Orleans going to the restroom, he passed somebody leaving it, which he didn't recognize until later as being, and I'm sorry, I mixed it up either, I think Ruby, but it might have been Ruby Oswald. Also, Ruby, what do you think of the theory that they induced cancer in him and not only got rid of Oswald, but Ruby went in the hospital and never got out of the hospital without dying from cancer? A couple of others, but I'll get off there and listen to those.
All right, Ed, thank you for that. Ruby was given cancer with a necktie or something. I've heard the theory.
Well, Ruby's an incredible story because he died rather quickly from the cancer, and people have suspected that there was weaponized cancer introduced to him through a shot. I'll tell you what's even more fascinating is a guy named Jolly West. I want listeners to remember that name, Jolly West. Indeed, enter it into a search engine. Who is involved in MKUltra, who pops up. In proximity to Jack Ruby, later on in proximity to Charles Manson, also in proximity to Sirhan Sirhan. You know what's funny about that? He pops up right before Ruby starts making a lot of crazy claims and doing things like bashing his head up against a wall in his cell. I want people to know that because that is very interesting when it comes
Jolly
to Jack
West
Ruby and his erratic behavior. Yes.
All
yes,
right.
It's interesting. Find him all over the place. You will. Throughout a whole lot of interesting historical figures. Everybody, like I said, from Manson and Sirhan to Jack Ruby. Possibly something happened to Jack Ruby that started to make him speak in a very crazy tone. And I, of course, didn't believe Melvin Belli's idea, I think that was his name, that he had some sort of brain damage that caused him to react from the lighting. No. I'm not sure about the cancer, but I'll tell you something happened to that man that changed his behavior and made him way more erratic after he did something pretty erratic to begin with. So there's a lot of questions about Jack Ruby and what might have happened to him, and I think they're all fair.
All right. East of the Rockies, Steve is in South Dakota. Steve, you're on the line with Chuck Ocelli. Go ahead.
Hey, thanks so much. Great show. I'm a retired reporter, and I interviewed Clint Hill about a decade ago. He's actually from North Dakota. And he surprised me by saying he was convinced that the shot that hit Kennedy first, the neck shot that, according to the Warren Commission, went through Connally, he said that wasn't the same shot that hit Connally. And it's important to remember that both Governor and his wife, Nellie Connally, also their whole life were very certain that he was not hit by that same shot because they were there. And Clint Hill, of course, was right there, jumped on the limo right after the headshot. And I think those are key things because that blows up the Warren Commission's single bullet theory that it hinges on. And more attention should be paid to that. There's got to be another explanation. And I'd also like to suggest that people should not try to solve this. I think a lot of people have to decide they have to choose between the official government version and 5,000 conspiracy theories. This is history. We don't know a lot of things in history. We may never solve this, but we can dismantle the Warren Commission's version as being implausible. And I think that's
excellent
a better
point.
Approach to take.
Interesting point, Steve. Thank you for that. Chuck, your thoughts?
Yeah, the only objection I have to that final point is that I think we are entitled to an answer when our collective will is subverted again by bullets. Now, that's just my minor disagreement. As to Clint Hill, yes, very interesting, all solid points there. I will point out also that Clint Hill himself, who was also an agent attached to Jacqueline Kennedy, yet doesn't believe the Landis story, has said that publicly since it dropped out before his book, got all that attention on, became a bestseller on Amazon, Richard.
All right. Chuck, just a final point, and, it's unfair, I guess, to give 3 minutes to you to let us know your thoughts on this, but how many, in your estimation, based on all of your research, how many gunmen and maybe where were they located in your estimation?
Okay, yeah, it is difficult. I would give it to you this way. A minimum of 2 is required to accomplish this, a minimum of 2. And I'll tell you something else. I am convinced that you have evidence of shots from the rear and in front. And indeed, there's evidence for a shot from sort of the side. See, the grassy knoll is not really so much in front as it is to the side of President Kennedy at the time of the shooting. And I believe that shot missed. We have acoustic evidence that suggests that shot is real, that's for sure. You have eyewitnesses, all kinds of things. I don't believe Mr. Files or Sutton fired it, but I do believe somebody did. And there's also evidence of bullets being taken from the other side of the street that missed. Anyway, you have evidence of the shots coming from the rear. You have James Tague, who was struck. You have the fact that you have a wound in the president's back, not the back of his neck, but his back. You definitely have, because Gerald Ford moved it to the back of his neck. But a topic for another day. Again, 3 minutes, right? Okay, and there is evidence, quite a bit of evidence, not just the back into the left violent head motion that they tried to explain away with a whole bunch of junk science over the years, but indeed the work of a lady named Sherry Feaster, who was a crime scene investigator, professionally has not been challenged. And she used publicly available and, other evidence, but mostly publicly available evidence to draw a picture that suggests to me that it is a certainty you have a frontal shot, at least one.
All right.
So
we're going to have to.
You can't put Oswald in 2 places at once, can you, Richard?
No, indeed. Chuck, how do we listen to the Ocelli Effect?
My name, Chuck Ocelli, very simple, OCHELLI.com. You can go there. You can find me almost anywhere where podcasts are, except YouTube. I've been thrown off of there. So that's that.
That is that, Chuck. Thank you so much. We'll have to do this again, and I appreciate your time. Great insights, as always.
Thank you, sir. I'm looking forward to the rest of the show, along with the audience, Richard, and thank you.
All right. Chuck Ocelli. James DiEugenio standing by. He's coming up next to talk more on the 60th anniversary